trying to avoid the whole larger political conversation nationally and internationally, but I just couldn't help but just take a minute and, really think that I think the United States, I think I actually agree with the people who are protesting the stay-at-home orders and, trying the people who are trying to get the economy going again. But I just really feel like it's like a moment where the United States needs to get beyond the stuff where it's like there's a debate in the United States about whether, whether coronavirus is a danger or whether we should be doing the shutdown and stuff. And, I think the larger issues there, a lot of people are pointing fingers at China, at the World Health Organization. And there's a lot of question marks how they handled this. You know what I mean? And seeing some of the data that's supporting some of those political and social and political conversations, I really think it's something that needs to be looked at more. And I agree with Trump. I think pulling the funding from the World Health Organization, they were back in January saying that this couldn't be transmitted people to people. There's a lot of China, Beijing, they're shutting down all the doctors, anyone who was speaking out about this when this was starting out. The data that's supporting this thing coming from a wet market versus coming from a place where they're doing, research on bioweapons, and all this stuff's going on right in the same area. How did this stuff get to like a Navy ship in the middle of the ocean, and how did all those sailors get infected with this in some instances where did this come from to get to them? Everyone's saying this is communicating person to person. Originally they were saying this didn't work that way. Right from the beginning, I was the one on my Facebook, I was saying I think this is atmospheric or something. So I just don't have I'm 100% with the people who are like, let's get the economy back to work. Let's use all of our precautions and let's let each individual business in the United States make their own call. So it's not like all the gas stations have to be open. Maybe some gas stations don't want to be open. You know what I mean? If they're in a real high risk area or something like that. And I think they should be able to decide that. I think it really should be business to business, and it should be person to person. And other people saying the same thing. I think there's a moment here where it's like individual. There's an individual responsibility and individual ownership, and if people shouldn't be penalized, of course, businesses and people shouldn't be penalized for taking precautions, and for not necessarily being open for business, but on the other hand, everyone who is at risk or not, suffering from this in more rural or remote areas and stuff like that, they shouldn't be getting penalized because this is a big issue in the city in a far away way, or something like that. Especially in light of all the fact that there's just so much ambiguous. There's just so much. There's all these question marks on how this came about and how it's been handled here in the U.S., but also by this World Health Organization, and specifically its point of origin in China. So I think all of that sort of all of that data and all of these big question marks sort of accumulate, and more than just the protests you've seen in Michigan and in other states where so many people are, and I think there's millions of people who aren't at the protests who 100% agree too. But there's also this contingent of people who are liberal and who are just so have so much conviction toward their anti-Trump thing that they're losing sight of the larger issues. And I think that's sort of a dangerous thing for the Democratic Party and for the liberal people who aren't. I don't see Democrats bad people, conservatives good people. I don't see the world like that. I'm not a black and white person like that in this instance, but I do definitely feel like there's a lot of great smart people on the Democratic side of the debate, and I think we're losing them where they're just so they've got a tunnel vision towards Trump being a bad guy, and they're not willing to be intellectually engaged towards these issues and this broader conversation about World Health Organization, the point of origin of this virus, and how it's being spread around the world and how it was managed from the outset, and then all of the questions about China, about Beijing, about the storyline of this coming from a wet market, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So bioweapons are a real thing. This is 2020. It's not a date that's random. How this is all starting in 2020. I believe everyone is guilty until proven innocent. I don't believe everyone's innocent until they're proven guilty. In this sort of thing where we're seeing also problems where hospitals are, and I was reading something last night. Hospitals are getting incentivized, like in New York or something like that, they're getting more money, federal money, when they say a death in the hospital is COVID-19 or coronavirus. So if people have pre-existing conditions, heart issues, they have AIDS, they have cancer, and people are dying all the time for all of these issues and other issues before this corona came on. So now there's issues where they're incentivized at these hospitals to begin saying that these deaths are COVID-19. Now maybe some of them are, maybe some of them aren't, but the problem is the underlying conditions in some of these instances. You know what I'm saying? So basically, they're incentivized to almost lie and fudge the paperwork and say, oh, 10 people died today. You know, maybe there's not the data to show that they died of COVID-19, but they're saying that they died of COVID-19. And so our data, what we're getting from a state like New York or New York City that's saying all this bad stuff is going on in places X or Y, some of this data could be corrupted and flawed, which would be which would be a really bad thing, especially because that is being incentivized by the federal government, maybe not on purpose, but through this thing where they're trying to manage this outbreak and this pandemic and this issue the right way. So they're delegating and they're sending resources and money to the places where there are a lot of deaths and where the outbreak is more severe. But the problem is the deaths and the numbers of the deaths and the outbreak being severe, that stuff's getting fudged by these people who are wanting this federal money because they're being told to do that by their management because people want to be able to be prepared. You know what I mean? I think people who are managing healthcare facilities want to be prepared. So I think, and I don't think that's a bad thing, but I think we need to make sure that the data that we're working with, whether it was right from the beginning and World Health Organization saying that this is something that cannot be communicated, where China is saying right off the bat this is coming from a wet market, without any data to prove it, you know what I mean? We have to really put a magnifying glass on this data, and we have to challenge and we have to question it, and we want to make sure we're working with the good data. We're working with facts, and we're not working with things that people are just saying. So if someone's saying, well, 100 people died from coronavirus at this hospital, we want to make sure that that's accurate. If someone's saying this coronavirus started in a wet market in China, we want to make sure it's accurate because, right next door, they've got a bioweapon facility and they've got research. And 3 years ago, they were doing, studies on bats and coronavirus and stuff like that. And, people in the U.S., Yahoo News was saying in March, people in the U.S., China people in the U.S. had coronavirus samples of it or something on them. So, and I'm not just trying to kick dirt on China. I don't think anyone in the United States is this didn't come from the U.S. So, it's, and then, there's just so many other issues, and, there's Bill Gates, there's the Harvard professor, and, but, I just think all that stuff too, there has to be data and there has to be facts to support all that stuff too. We need to make sure that we're working with facts and data if we're going to be saying, if there's a group of people or a person saying that Bill Gates is a bad guy or World Health Organization is something wrong with it. You know what I mean? I think it's pretty clear that there are some issues with how they handled this pandemic outbreak and the virus, how they were saying to the public it was something that was, it was not as communicable person to person, but then there's all these questions, where the fuck is he coming from? Why is a Navy ship in the middle of the Atlantic or Pacific getting a big outbreak and having 2,000 sailors get this if they weren't exposed to anyone and they were totally isolated? So, there's, and that's a question for our government too, frankly. You know what I mean? So I think, but I just think, the theme that I'm really looking at with this pandemic, how it's been handled by governments and by health organizations worldwide, and, nationally, but also internationally. And that's the big thing, though. I think, the theme I'm looking at is I want data to be proven. I want points to be proven. Whether we're saying this, this or this or this, I want to actually see facts to support it. I don't want to just see someone saying, well, New York has millions of deaths because of coronavirus. All the deaths for all these other pre-existing conditions that were going on prior, heart attacks, cancer, AIDS, blah, 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 and all those issues are all of a sudden being put on mute, and all those people are being put, lumped or, bumped into this category of the coronavirus deaths, and that's almost a fraudulent thing to be doing. I really think it is a fraud, even if just because they're getting incentivized by the federal thing. So, and then there's Beijing, and there's, the WHO, and there's Bill Gates. Bill Gates isn't a doctor. You know what I mean? He's not a doctor. You can say it 5 different times. We can say World Health Organization is not funded by, it's not really funded. It's more, it's like people are saying, it's China-centric thing. It's probably a true observation. It's not funded by governments in a democratic way. You know what I mean? There's wealthy individuals and stuff. The way they handled it is problematic. So all of this stuff, I think, is like, I think it's a gold mine of, America. Right now we're seeing people talking about the Confederate flag. We're seeing people protesting peacefully, even though they're saying stay home. And the governors are saying, well, this, that. The governors need to step the fuck down. And, individual people and individual businesses have a right, in our country. And we're not going to let these people take our constitutional rights away. They have a right, and we have a right to, to manage our own future. You know what I mean? And if the World Health Organization had hailed this correctly from the beginning, beginning, we wouldn't be in this predicament. And, I just think pointing the fingers at Trump is not a solution because, even in Alaska, for instance, people are coming from Wuhan, China to Alaska in January. It's in Alaska. Fox News had it on Twitter. We covered it. No one's even perking up and waking up about this till 3 months later. And, I think the issues with corrupted data everywhere on this is really problematic, and I think everyone needs to get out of panic mode, and we need to get into proactive mode. And we need to get into active mode, and we need to just, put our masks on, put our gloves on, and keep America working, keep going back at it. And if people are sick, if people are sick, and if businesses are in a real vulnerable area and don't want to operate, they 100% should be able to make that decision. And but I think in other areas where those businesses need to be able to get back at it. So I think our economy should not be just destroyed because there's the potential, and the problem is that there is an ulterior motive by China, World Health Organization, who knows, to destroy the economy on purpose with this thing, to put everyone in panic mode. And that is the real problem, because that would, we don't want to weaken America. There's a lot of people, look at me right now. Do I look like I'm out of commission? No. But I respect the coronavirus. I respect healthcare professionals. I got to go. My dog's panting and I got to go somewhere. But you know what I mean? I respect all of that data and all those people. But, again, what's an essential business? What's a non-essential business, right? Where's the data and the research papers to say McDonald's drive-through is essential, but, going to the gym is not essential? That doesn't make sense from a healthcare perspective. When they shut down all those businesses, everyone went to the Walmart or the Costco. There was a high concentration of diversity of people going to those one store. They're going to catch something at that store. It was a mismanaged way, in my opinion. Though granted, in a real isolated village or in a really big city, some of that stuff in terms of managing this outbreak, in terms of the shutdown and stuff, might have made more sense. But I just listened to, and I was kind of driving around when this happened, then I stopped, but I just listened to these governors and stuff, and there's too much of a power trip. There's too much of American rights at stake. And I think we need to just, more protests going on. I think more power to the people, more power to the individual businesses. That's what our country's about, right? You know what I mean? Our country's not about, people not being able to vote. You know what I mean? Our country's not about, fear. Our country historically, 300 years ago, our country was about people organizing. Our country was about people standing up to a foreign power. You know what I mean? And that's kind of what's going, whether World Health Organization or whether it's China or whatever, there's just, whether it's the governor in your own state or the mayor in your own city, we shouldn't be boss. If we want to walk, if we want to go to the gym, we should be able to do it. You know what I mean?